Thanks again. My name is Dan Orkin. I'm one of the co-founders here at Envision Blockchain. And today we're going to be talking about the best blockchain use case. And I think that for anyone that's involved in the blockchain space, or for anyone that's dealing from just business in general, maybe from IT in general, this is probably something that when you saw this at your inbox, you're thinking, oh, okay, finally, somebody has an idea on what the best blockchain use case is all about. At Envision Blockchain, we help organizations with consulting around use case ideation all the way through development and such. And this is going to be an interesting topic here because we're going to build on some of the things that we talked about over, I want to say last year. There was a couple presentations that we talked about requirements gathering and development and then use case ideation. And then last month, we talked about blockchain trends in general. So we're going to put some of these things together to help you understand what you should be looking at when you're putting together a blockchain use case. So it's some sort of an application that in general is going to be leveraging a component of a distributed ledger technology. And okay, so we'll go ahead and get started here. Just for a little bit of an introduction, I see that there are some new folks in here. There's some familiar faces. Thanks again for joining. Just to help you understand who Envision Blockchain is, it'll give you a little bit more context into this presentation. We are a consulting and custom application development organization. We help out companies from, as you can see, from left to right, helping out with development from proof of concepts all the way out through MVP build outs and different types of rollouts. That typically starts with functional and technical requirements gathering, smart contract development, token development, auditing the smart contracts, also developing out the UI, the UX, which is a really big piece of any sort of application, all the way through system monitoring, testing, and then once a solution goes live, we also help out with post-go live support services. You can see in the middle, these are some of the technologies that we usually put into a blockchain application, what we've seen before, from infrastructure as code, different databasing, disaster recovery is also part of the support services, migration to the cloud, microservices, line of business applications, so on and so forth. And then also put this at the end, but it's really at the beginning of the approach is the workshopping. So to help understand what tokenization is all about, use case analysis, IoT and blockchain, AI and blockchain discovery day, so on and so forth. If you're interested in any of these workshops, it's a really great way to get started. And without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the presentation. So we'll be talking about just three basic themes over here. So the first theme we'll be talking about is how can you find value? I think finding value is a really important part. Obviously, before you build, you need to make sure that there's some kind of business justification behind it, and that it's a solution that has a solid foundation behind that. What we're going to do also, we're going to do a recap of the use case trends that we're seeing and some of the really interesting value points that these use cases are really bringing to the forefront. And then we're going to tie everything together at the end and bring together some sort of a conclusion here. Blockchain implementation, it's very simple, right? If you try to look at the very core of what a blockchain application should be doing, it should be either generating revenue or reducing costs. That's it. So if you're looking at the different applications that you could be developing internally, or maybe you're discussing from the business side, or maybe the technology team is building some sort of solutions, you got to have a goal in mind. Like, what are you trying to do? And what we're seeing is that you need to either generate revenue or reduce costs. I'll bring a little bit of some of the lessons learned. I want to say about a year and a half ago, maybe a year and 3/4 ago, we were helping out one of our clients that were in the finance space. And we helped them sell this internally to some financial institutions. The solution was a regulatory type of a solution, and the solution was not supposed to generate revenue, but it was supposed to really help customers of this SaaS platform eliminate fees and eliminate different penalties that could happen should this regulatory compliant factor not be met. Anyway, the stakeholders of the client's business of who we were trying to talk to said, listen, all we want to do is we want to see this reduce operational expenses by at least $2 million. So that's just one little example of how you need to be able to either generate revenue or reduce costs. Throughout this presentation, we'll highlight some of these examples. In order to get to the end, we have to start at the beginning, and we need to talk about what the blockchain journey is all about. So obviously, this is a familiar type of a journey. This is something that I discussed, how Envision Blockchain or services are actually aligned pretty nicely. But you can probably relate that at the beginning, you're starting at the use case assessment. You figure out what sort of use case you need. You move on to the solution design. You figure out the solution design. Then you go on and you build it, probably some sort of an iterative build. Then you go ahead and you go live. And then when you go live, there's going to be post go live events that happen, such as release trains if your organization is following the SAFe methodology, which is the scaled agile framework. Neither here nor there, but what we're going to start is we're going to start move through this phase over here and understand where can the best blockchain use cases, where can you find some of these common denominators, if you will. So first we need to find value, right? So again, are we generating revenue? Are we reducing expenses? So at the use case assessments, at the analysis at the beginning, it's a good practice to start with some sort of a cost benefit analysis. Now, this isn't the end all to be all, but this should be done. And there's really two main purposes of the cost benefit analysis. Really, number one, you should be using this to determine if the project is sound, justifiable, if it's feasible, and overall, if the benefit outweighs the cost. But in general, this is a practice that the organization is doing. By doing these cost benefit analysis, is you're going to be able to have some sort of an ROI or some sort of a payback period, MPV, if this is some of the metrics that your organization is looking to do. And essentially, by doing this, you offer now a baseline to compare one project versus another project. And you get to then determine which project benefits are really greater than its costs. And that's the key value. So again, we're looking at value. So how are we going to be able to save money? And that's one of the things that the blockchain is supposed to be doing. We're going to get to it, but essentially you should be removing these intermediaries. You should be able to do something in a way that allows you to save time, save money, make money, something along those paths. Another one in our bag of tricks, for example, is a strategic risk assessment, where if you follow the path, again, we're starting at the top-down approach. You understand the strategy of the organization, you gather the data, the views of the strategic risk, prepare preliminary strategic risk profile, so on and so forth. Basically, you need to understand the type of risk that this particular project is going to be doing to the overall strategy of the organization. Also, if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and put it into the chat. I'm actually monitoring the chat as we go. Feel free to ask questions. If it's something that's on topic, I'll answer it quickly. If it's something that's off topic, I'll make sure to save some time at the end. So a journey map is also something that's from our perspective, this is a really fun exercise to do, because you get to personify the way that the use case is with drawing different emotion lines, for example, because when you get to the core of it, applications are really just users, right? So you want to see where the users are feeling the pain, where the organization is feeling the burn. And this is where you get to have these different opportunities and different KPIs that the organization needs to hit. For example, just putting something out here, what Envision put together within the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance when we're working in one of the use case task force groups is this oversimplified journey map of a supply chain vertical agnostic example. But I'm not going to read the whole thing, but you could see in the top left, we start by identifying the stakeholders. You have your producers, your processors, your retailers, etc. You have the expectations of what they should be doing, decrease the bottlenecks, so on and so forth. And we're going to get to some of these use cases, like a good little shadow. So we go through the different phases, right? So it's like, where do the phases begin? Where do they end? And what are the pain points around those different phases? what you do is you start to uncover these sort of opportunities that should be able to define these functional requirements and metrics that need to be hit. Again, we're starting at the beginning to be able to understand where can we find value to get to what the best blockchain use case is all about. Once you do all these cost benefit analysis, and then you start to get to the strategic alignment and the prioritization, and then we go ahead and we do the journey map. Now we need to start to document these process flows. So now we figure out the process flows, and these are some examples of what we worked in. There's one with an ocean freight logistics example. There's another one with a procurement example. And you could make it as simple as on the left-hand diagram, you have, for example, different EDI codes. You have different actors that are in the environment, if you will, or the ecosystem, where you can get granular, like in the right example that shows the different technologies, the zero knowledge proofs, and the smart contracts, and what gets written, and what are the transactions, and so on and so forth. Depends on the appetite and where we are within the process. And then, of course, after you get all that, now we have to get to some sort of a solution design, and we get to the architecture diagrams. And here's an example of something else that we did with regards to incentive programs, where we have different technologies like trusted execution enclaves that are part of it. We have the UI, the back end, the front end that's held up in Node.js servers. And then we have the blockchain ledger, which is on the right-hand side, and all the different smart contracts that are part of this different smart contract framework, if you will. That then leads to something like this. There's another example of an architecture diagram that shows more of a deployment world, where the flow comes from different systems like ERPs that need to hit different integration services, that hit databases, so on and so forth. But this is on the planning side. So what's interesting now is that what we could do is think about, okay, look, now we're going to speak at a higher level, overarching view of what the industry has been doing. So now what we could do is we can take a half a step back. We took you through the world of, if you were to put all the pen and paper together and all the stakeholders together, and we're coming up with the different value points. Okay, how can we document this? How can we make sense of this? How can it look good on paper? Now, when something's been deployed, now that's your chance to actually realize the return on investment. There was a couple use case trends that we talked about that are really hot right now. And for example, we see that the popular type of use cases are within supply chain. And there's a ton that are going on in supply chain, but we'll focus on two of them right now. Real estate is really hot right now, and same with the decentralized finance. And for those that are familiar with decentralized finance, there's all sorts of different speculation sides of it, but the core infrastructure of the banking of what it provides is something that's really interesting there to us. Now, if we take even a little bit more of a step back, what we can take a look at is now the use cases that I've just defined. They're really focused around two major value points. You're either going to see elements of accounting, or you're going to see elements of accountability. Sometimes you'll see a mixture of both. Sometimes you'll see one that's heavy on one side and light on the other, and it could be flip-flopped. But in general, when you're going to see elements of accountability, that's calling for blockchain. It's just screaming out. Blockchain does a really fantastic job of providing accountability. And with accounting, that is almost where blockchain technology stemmed from, right? This is almost why we call it a ledger, and accounting professionals are very comfortable with the general ledger in general. Again, supply chain, real estate, and decentralized finance. And some of the use cases that we talked about in our previous webinar dealt with, for example, Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola has a partner called Kona, which stands for Coke One North America. And they're using a methodology called the baseline protocol for their bottling network. So Coca-Cola has suppliers, they have buyers. It's a very supply chain centric type of a use case. We're going to dive into where the benefits are with that one. There's another type of use case that was just put out by Microsoft. Again, it's another supply chain type of use case. Again, with buyers and with suppliers. We'll dive into that. We'll dive into a little bit of the real estate use cases, and same with DeFi. Now, what's interesting is that it's almost like a magnifying glass. When you take a look at the different verticals, if you will, or the horizontals in this case. So the horizontal here would be supply chain. And when you add blockchain to a supply chain application or a supply chain type of use case, what you're really doing is what we've been noticing is that you're magnifying reducing costs. We'll explain why in the next couple slides. You can definitely generate revenue. That's not what we're saying. We're not saying that you can't, but we're saying that the ability to magnify the reducing cost element is tremendous. And same in finance, right? So in finance, it's the other side. Finance, you can reduce costs. Absolutely. You're reducing intermediaries, but essentially you really are magnifying generating revenue. And we'll show you how in the next couple slides. So talking about the Coke One North America use case, again, it's a supply chain type of use case. And what we're seeing over here is that there's this procurement process between to issue out the request for proposals for the Coca-Cola bottlers. They need different ingredients. They need their sugars. They need their syrups. They need all of their secret ingredients in order to go ahead and make that good tasting Coke soft drink. And there's a challenge with that. And the challenge is that what if there's a supplier that has what they need, but they just don't have the IT infrastructure to be able to jump on? So there needs to be able to add better discovery. There needs to be able to have a quicker onboarding for suppliers. And then on top of that, you also should be able to tokenize the invoices because we are adding blockchain into there. We do often, and this is interesting, I'm going to go on a little bit of a side tangent over here. We do talk about scalability. But scalability at times talks about the transactions per second, for example, or like we're talking about Ethereum, and there's issues with Ethereum scalability. But there's often times where we consult with our customers where we talk about scalability, such as how many different type of benefits and features can you get from implementing a use case. So for example, in the Kona example, yes, they're going to be able to provide quicker onboarding for their suppliers, and they're going to be able to incorporate the master service agreements in a way that cannot be changed, and the volume tiers are going to be locked in place. But they're also going to be able to scale out the different type of use cases, such as tokenizing the invoices so that you can actually pay the suppliers quicker based on being able to tokenize an invoice. Super interesting concept, and this is going to be going live by the end of Q1 of this year. Another type of use case over here is with the Microsoft supply chain. So this also deals with buyers and suppliers, but just generally speaking here, we're seeing a huge amount of cost reduction. And this talks about the different benefits of cost efficiencies. We talk about the value that's being realized, for example, price reconciliation overhead, reduced risk of tariffs, optimize inventory costs, audit overhead, so on and so forth, agility in operations that they're seeing by real-time updates and notifications. Again, you can have these smart contracts that are going to be able to trigger different events based on real-time things that happen, reduce manual work, better planning inventory, again, by having the real-time updates and notifications. We talk about quality management by having the tracking down to the serial level. You're going to be able to prevent counterfeit goods from entering into your supply chain, accelerate the quality of the recalls, and then security and legitimacy. They go hand in hand. But again, when we talk about security, we're talking about the reduction of cost from having to mitigate an issue when something happens. And same thing with the legitimacy. Again, maintain your compliance to the law, contractual obligations, so on and so forth. This is something that has gone live within the Microsoft supply chain and the way that they're dealing with their buyers and their suppliers for their products. Now, what's interesting is when we talk about the real estate world, again, this is just a really quick example. There's not just the generating revenue, there also is on the reduction of costs. For example, we talk about the land deeds and dealing with the different paperwork that's allowed. You can really having digital documentation in an industry that has the burden of a lot of paperwork, I think is going to be a really important cost reduction. But in the general state, when we talk about investor management, what we're really talking about is being able to tokenize and provide fractional investors so that you don't need to put up a whole large sum of money in order to jump into the market and invest into real estate. Now what they could do is they can tokenize and make smaller denominations so that you can have a lower barrier to entry. Again, we're generating massive amounts of revenue this way. And with DeFi, this is also something important here, because with DeFi, we're talking about a brand new type of banking system, which is very similar to the current banking system that we are currently seeing. So the ability to offer flash loans really quickly to help with capital is a huge revenue generator. And we're seeing that there's billions and billions of dollars, which is being locked into DeFi right now. The world is taking to this. They're able to provide liquidity in markets that are thin, and they're also being able to have these investment composability based on different risk strategies. So what we mean by that is, for example, for those that are familiar with the DeFi space, there's like these hot swaps out there. So for example, you can stake your collateral into one place, you can take out a loan which earns interest, and you can deposit it somewhere else, and so on and so forth. The long story short is that these blockchain use cases and the uses of smart contracts and being able to penetrate these industries that are crying out for these innovations, they're really able to see benefits that they haven't been able to see. And again, just to wrap everything up here, so the key to driving ROI in blockchain implementations is to really look for, when you're doing your use case assessments, I'm going to try to tie this all together. When you're doing your solution design and you're doing your use case assessments and you're coming up with your overall strategies, look for elements where there's either accounting or accountability. You're going to really be able to drive ROI because these are things that we can put numbers to, and we can do our cost benefit analysis, and we can really come up with ways to figure out our metrics and our KPIs, so that when something goes live, or when you're in a POC phase, or when you're in a pilot phase, you can actually go back and you can do calculations and you can understand what this ROI is, as opposed to just an intangible benefit that makes it awfully difficult to come up with ROI sometimes. Just some next steps. I want to just put this out here for anyone that's interested to get started, not sure where everybody is within their blockchain journey per se, but let's say that maybe you want to start on a new journey. Maybe there's new use cases that you need to take a look into. We do recommend to take a look on our website. We offer our Enterprise Blockchain Discovery Day, where we take a look at, from a top-down approach, what's happening within the organization, what are the different use cases, which ones make sense, and then we can drill down and really get into the solution design and roll our hands up that way. Again, thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate this. We usually do these webinars somewhere around the last week of the month, usually Wednesday or Thursday. 2 p.m. Eastern time is typically the time that we do it. So I hope to see everybody again. And I'll pause here to see if there's any questions. Feel free to use the chat.